In the past, patients have had to wait for a doctor or nurse to administer their vital pain-relieving medication. But with this small machine called a patient-controlled analgesia, patients can administer their own relief at the push of a button. The dosage is set by the doctor so that the patient can activate the machine for a small amount of morphine to be fed intravenously.
They feel happier that they're in control, more relaxed, because they know that they don't have to undergo pain unnecessarily, and the process is totally in their hands.
There are precautions to prevent the patient overdosing accidentally. A certain time must pass before the machine can be activated again. Each unit costs $4,500, but with the importance on patient comfort, it is taking the pain out of future hospital care. Jodie McKay for NBN News.
Police are hoping for a more quiet time tonight after yesterday's incident when 5 officers were injured during a brawl with patrons of the Toronto hotel. It's alleged the fisticuffs erupted when police moved to arrest a man for offensive language shortly after the hotel closed at 11:30 p.m. A police service revolver was apparently taken by an onlooker during the struggle. It was later found discarded in a nearby street by a member of the public after a fruitless police search.
The Newcastle Falcons won moment of glory in 1990. They shocked the Cannons that night and walked away with the points. This time they won't even have the element of surprise.
Canberra will be waiting for us, desperate to balance up the only real blot on their season, probably.
In a season that seems like one long bad dream for Falcons fans, this road trip shapes as the worst nightmare of all. Friday night they take on competition leaders and reigning champions North Melbourne, while the next night offers no respite against the 89 runners-up. Coach Ken Cole has little option but to be philosophical.
Terrible position to be in last spot. I mean, first spot's just as hard because everybody wants to knock you off. And last spot's just as hard because nobody can afford to lose to you. So they play you flat out in either of those two positions. So at least we know at the end of a game what we've got to make up on a team at the end of the season, because they do play us flat out. They don't mess around very much.
North and southbound traffic was diverted from the Charlestown bends as police feared the truck and its load would crash to the road below. The truck had been delivering gravel to a house in Lees Street when its brakes failed and it lurched through a fence and narrow strip of bushland. The truck became snared in fencing wire and hung centimetres from the edge.
And myself and the neighbour were just standing there quite helpless and just absolutely shattered. I could see him disappearing down over the edge. And the fence just didn't seem to be holding. And then all of a sudden the fence just gripped the truck and held it there. You know, it was just a sheer miracle. And the poor guy, when his head finally appeared up out of the side of the door, it was as white as, unbelievable, the poor guy.
Steve, you're in the driver's seat. What happened?
Well, I was just trying to turn around and all my air went in the truck and I just had no brakes and it just started to go. And I was just sitting in there hanging on. Getting ready to, die, I suppose.
Heavy tow trucks recovered the vehicle and police reopened the highway.
The Wharf Road nightclub was off limits to all visitors today. Security guards were under instructions to admit no one, not even the owner. A stony silence has greeted all inquiries as to the nightclub's future and the reasons why the State Bank arranged for security guards to move onto the premises yesterday. Fannie's was reopened in April by Cessnock liquor store operator Russell Hawkins. It's understood he was in the nightclub last night but had no comment on these latest developments. Late today, he remained tight-lipped over the episode. The State Bank's head office in Sydney advised that it was preparing a press release, but at 6 o'clock tonight, no media statement was forthcoming. In the meantime, Fannie's remains the subject of unsubstantiated speculation. This latest development is perhaps the most dramatic in a 12-year history, which has seen Fannie's operating variously as a theatre restaurant, a disco, a live band venue and a nightclub. If there's anything to be learned by this ill-fated revival, it must be that the nightclub industry ain't what it used to be. Tom Hilston, NBN News. Residents surrounding South's Leagues Club have had a long-running argument with the club management. On Wednesday, they went to the Newcastle Liquor Administration Board, where licensing magistrate Cess Bray heard their objections. He upheld an application to limit the club's trading hours under Section 17AA on two grounds. Firstly, the behaviour of patrons leaving the club, and secondly, the amount of noise coming from the club premises. The club argued that the noise problem was due to earthquake damage and could be repaired. The magistrate's decision does allow for review in the light of new building plans being submitted or if an agreement was reached between the club and residents. In the meantime, Souths is like Cinderella, the party must end at midnight. The decision will have little effect on the club for most of the week when it closes its doors at 10 p.m. However, on those peak trading nights of Friday and Saturday when the club used to close at 2 a.m, the financial impact will be deepest. The New South Wales Clubs Act pretty much gives clubs their choice of trading hours. The Liquor Administration Board's decision has disturbed the Registered Clubs Association of New South Wales. A spokesman said the decision was the first to be made under new legislation allowing the Liquor Board to conciliate disputes between clubs and private citizens. The victory by residents at Merewether may inspire others across the state, but the locals say they are open to further compromise.
If club management were prepared to negotiate a fair deal, like cut the noise by one, I'm sure that neighbours would be willing to come to the party. We're not here just to destroy the club. We want the club to be a success. We enjoy the fact that young people have a good time there.
The Carrington Slipway's built icebreaker is back for a 2-week stopover after trials in the Tasman Sea. 3 months of tests found problems with electrical equipment, onboard computers, sonar and the massive 12 and 16 cylinder engines. Crew of the Aurora Australis say it's simply fine-tuning and is expected in any new ship.
Is this stopover in Newcastle going to put you behind schedule at all?
No, it was planned from when the ship was built, so there's no time lost whatsoever.
Carrington Slipway workers and subcontractors will correct any problems before the boat heads south for scientific and research work in the Antarctic. The RAF's fighter squadrons flew out 2 weeks ago for Operation Pitch Black in Australia's top end. Road contractor Bitchapave was hired to resurface the Williamtown runway while the fighters were away. But a statewide strike by the Australian Workers' Union over pay increases for asphalt workers has thrown that plan into chaos midway through the job. While the union believes it has a strong bargaining card holding the runway to ransom, the RAF base says, if necessary, the fighters returning next month will land on taxiways at the base.
Florida. Well, there was also a fair bit of noise down at the VFL Park yesterday with Carlton. Sticking with the breeze in the first turn, the Magpie centre line was immediate.
Did you say something, Trevor?
Sound to make sheet metal lead to 39 points after a fine piece of roving. The first half of the third quarter was fairly even, but when Dacos bagged the torpedo, it is the come-on.
Yes, the poor old Sydney Swans can't take a trick at the moment on the local scene. Warners Bay 13-12-90 defeated Newcastle City 11.
Lakes opened strongly and were unlucky not to score after Hibbard's bomb was held up over the line. Captain coach Peter Walsh got the Lakes outfit on the board with a penalty, and then Neil Baker spent 10 in the bin for a professional foul. But the brilliant 5/8 came back strongly 5 minutes before half-time with a pass to Reid, back to Baker who fumbled, and it was picked up by Atkins who scooted in for the try. West went further ahead when Mal Graham swivelled out of a tackle to score, and the Rosellas were in front 14-2 at the break. Lakes again started strongly, and it was hooker Stephen Brown who crossed after a sustained Lakes attack. Walsh kicked a penalty to narrow the gap to 2, and then former Knights winger Brian Quinton soared high above the pack to sensationally catch and ground the ball off a Walsh bomb for a fair try, and Lakes had hit the front. Back came West with 2 penalties to Neil Baker, and it was locked at 18 all. To complicate matters for the Rosellas, Law McDougall was dismissed from the field for the use of a knee. And a minute later, Lakes were in from a ball by Hibbard to Botham. He threw a long cut-out pass to Quinton, and he strolled in for his second, and Lakes joined West on top with 27 points. It didn't take long for the Knights to get on the board, and it was Mullane and Hagan who set up Gary Worth. Norths kicked a penalty, and they must have felt at that stage they were still in touch. Mark Glanville decided to rattle a few teeth with one of the bell ringers of the year, and then brilliant centre Jeff Doyle scored 4 minutes before half-time. After the break, Michael Hagan was again involved for Glanville to cross. Ashley Gordon scored his customary try from inside North's half. Hooker David Mullane made it 26-2 with Hagan and Doyle again involved. For North, David Hill grabbed a consolation try right on full time. But the Knights moved to 21 competition points and one outside the 5.
You know how much that little dog means to me.
The ladies' final was a battle of the Steel Cities, pitting Kelly Press from Wollongong against Lee Kessel of Newcastle. Right from the outset, Press got on top, and from there on never let Kessel into the match. Press raced through the first set 6-1, and it appeared as though she was headed for an easy victory. But Kessel put up a good fight in the second set before losing touch and the match to Press 6-3 in the second. The men's final was an all-Newcastle affair between defending champion Brian Williams and Cahibah's Malcolm Kessel, brother-in-law of Lee. The outcome of this match took a similar path to the ladies' final, with Williams on top from the start and using his court speed and powerful ground strokes raced through the first set 6-2. Kessel couldn't get back on track, and Williams, with victory in his sights, stormed home to record a straight sets win 6-2, 6-1.
The
The report was handed to the hospital executive in September 1988. At that time, it described the Royal as being a danger zone for asbestos contamination, in particular the lower floors of the McCaffrey wing. The bottom line was that signs be placed around the buildings immediately, warning of the high levels of asbestos, and that staff wear breathing apparatus at all times while working in the areas identified as being particularly bad. But despite that lapse in time, it wasn't until last week when the report's author, John Flint, arrived at the Royal for a routine visit that the staff, even the chief executive, heard of its existence.
None of these things were provided. Our people weren't even told about this.
Mark Bird of the Health and Research Employees Association admitted today he was shocked and angry by the board's cover-up.
They didn't want to panic the public in putting all these stickers around the place.
As soon as it heard of the report, the association executive confronted management demanding an explanation and action. Signs have now been installed. All staff working in the worst areas have been issued with masks. But the union officials aren't prepared to let it rest at that. A meeting has been called for Friday morning. Mr Bird has not ruled out some form of industrial action. Far from being critical of the union's stand, this afternoon Hospital Chief Executive Officer Stephen Batts was sympathetic. Only new to the Royal, he says he was also taken by surprise to learn of the report's existence. What was your reaction when you heard those recommendations hadn't been acted on?
Pretty angry. Yeah, I just wanted these sorts of things should be done, protection for staff. I think the hospital should have done more to get the signs up.
However, Mr Batts says he is confident the hospital now has the problem under control. Plans are afoot to bring the author, John Flint, to Newcastle to re-examine the problem. And Mr Batts promises this time his findings will be made public.
When complete, the John Hunter Hospital will boast 500 beds and have cost just under $150 million. Local builder McCloy's has had to beat earthquakes and continuing rain, but is still 11 months ahead of schedule. Today's handover marked the formal commissioning of the operating theatres, recovery and intensive care units, cardiac care and X-ray departments. The accident reception area and cafeteria are also finished, with work in this latest stage totalling $65 million. Progressive handovers will continue until the end of October, when commissioning will be complete.
This is a major section of the hospital which allows us to get into it and equip it, test it, set it up and be ready for middle January when the first patients come.
Work began on the site late in 1986. Since then, 22,000 cubic metres of concrete and 8 million bricks have been laid. The hospital building has 3,400 rooms and 380 toilets. 9 operating theatres are housed there. One will be especially equipped for open-heart surgery. The need for the John Hunter Hospital has been evident in recent months, with a critical shortage of beds in the region. This new facility will fill that shortfall and more.
I believe the project has a very high community profile, in that the facility is desperately needed by the Hunter region, and particularly after the earthquake with extensive damage at the Martyr, the Royal and West Walls End. It's created the urgency that we needed in order to finish this.
The 4-kilometre stretch of dual carriageway will remove the notorious S-bends from the Pacific Highway south of Swansea. $20 million is being spent to deviate the highway between Mine Camp Road and the Swansea roundabout. The RTA says it will now open the entire new stretch of road by December 1991 and not in stages as originally planned. The staging of work between the northern and southern approaches means that earthworks and pavement work are now out of sync, leading to the standing down of 7 casual operators such as graders, rollers and water carts. Some contractors feared the roadworks would wind down as rumours of a lack of funds did the rounds. There have been suggestions that the Pacific Highway north of Newcastle and roads in Sydney's west would soak up money earmarked for the local project. But Divisional Engineer Laurie Dowling remained confident today that the road would be finished on time, weather and funding permitting. John Church, NBN News.
The inquest in the East Maitland court was attended by relatives of both the dead boys. It's investigating the deaths of 16-year-old Alexander Amy, found hanged in his cell at Tamworth's Endeavour house on October 3 last year, and 17-year-old Dermot Pigeon, also found hanged in the Maitland jail on October 21. Pigeon had been an inmate at Endeavour House until he was transferred to Maitland just 3 days before his death. The institution was closed as a youth detention facility amidst much uproar less than 2 months later. Today, Coroner Derek Hand heard evidence from other boys at the centre who had been involved in a riot shortly before Amy's death. One witness, whose name was suppressed, told the court those involved in the riot were punished by virtual solitary confinement. They were locked in their cells for 22 hours each day, given only a lidless bucket to use as a toilet, fed in their cells with the bucket still in there, and not allowed to wash immediately before or after their meals. Counsel for the Pigeon family asked the witness why the inmates had labelled Endeavour House youth workers as murderers. The witness replied, if they had let us out, Alex would still be alive. The witness also told the court several inmates had made nooses in a bid to force the lifting of the restrictions. The coroner is expected to hand down his findings in respect to the death of Alexander Amy sometime tomorrow. The hearing of evidence concerning the death of Dermot Pigeon is expected to take the rest of the week. Bruce McKenzie, NBN News.
Watched by the police colonel in charge of the investigation, Karen Smith gave her first television interviews today.
I'd rather face a death sentence than 25 years.
You'd rather die than serve 25 years in prison? You really thought that?
I'm not scared of dying. I'd rather die.
But the Thai authorities don't in fact execute foreigners, so you're not going to be executed.
Well, if I have 25 years, they better put me in a soft room because I'll do it myself.
A residents' meeting on Sunday voted overwhelmingly to oppose the establishment of a waste receival and treatment plant in the Mayfield area. Although the site has not been announced, a document leaked from Newcastle Council suggests Mayfield West is the preferred site. However, a spokesman from Cleanaway says the Mayfield site is just one of 13 locations being considered. Although the company refuses to name the others, it does say they're all in the Newcastle area, as it produces 70% of industrial waste generated in the Lower Hunter. The company says it cannot accommodate residents' demands for the plant to be at least 10 kilometres from a residential area. It says reputable studies on the disposal of industrial waste require a buffer zone of between only 1 and 2 kilometres. The company also flatly denies residents' claims that the new plant will treat intractable waste. It does say, though, that the feasibility of an incinerator is still being considered. Residents also say medical waste has only just been added to the list of treatable refuse. The company says it was recently awarded a contract by the Hunter Area Health Service to dispose of the region's medical waste. Instead of separate facilities, it was decided to combine them. A local independent consultant has been engaged by Cleanaway to look at the possible sites. It's expected an environmental impact statement will be presented to Council next month and a development application lodged by the end of the year.